I think we are ready to move to the presentation portion of our program this afternoon. I wanted to just take this opportunity to welcome all of you again here to this trip down memory lane, this church that all of you have great memories of. And this is such a diverse group. I'm just curious, who is the oldest person in this room? You are? I don't think so. What are the ages? How old are you, Louise? I think.
Lloyd, are you 89? You're 89, right?
Yeah. 89? Wow. I think that would be hard to beat. The youngest person is actually sitting on Sonia's lap here. Anna, not Sonia. Anna. Oh, right. Baby is the youngest. How old is she?
10 months.
10 months. Okay. So 10 months. Anna is 14 months. Katrina, how old are you?
I'm 9.5.
9.5. Okay. Talia, how old are you? 4? 4. Okay. So and then we have 89. That's a great spread. We also have a spread in terms of distance traveled to get here. I think the Heston folks, you have traveled the longest distance.
They live 1 mile further away than we do.
Oh, really? So, well, Howard and Kathy, I want to welcome you. Howard and Kathy are both the regional conference ministers that oversee the work of Argentine Mennonite, and I really thank you guys for all making it. And Kurt is the former regional conference minister, and actually the first Mennonite that I met in my life. So, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, so I'm really glad that you all can be here tonight as we do this thing. Okay, you're gonna say.
People usually ask when I introduce myself. So Rufus Horst is my great uncle.
No.
He was a pastor here many years.
That's just amazing. That's amazing. So, well, that's what this afternoon is going to be about. Hearing amazing stories and connections. And for that part of the program, I am going to hand it over to Judy Hirschberger and Marsha Dina. Pastor Mervin and Marsha have done a lot of the research in this period that we're going to look at from the beginning of the 19th century. It's good. It's good. 1883. Okay. Wow. It was like 1883. Okay. Well, on that note, I'm going to hand it over to the historians.
All right. Well, we're so glad that we have each one of you here this afternoon, and hope that it's been a special day so far, and that the upcoming time of sharing will be a good time of reminiscing, maybe learning some new things, and a reminder of how God has been faithful to the people of Argentine Mennonite Church over the years. Mervin Hirschberger has spent so much time researching and putting together a history of Mennonites in the Kansas City area, and specifically with Argentine Mennonite Church. And you can see we have a timeline up there which lists a lot of things that are going to be talked about today.
Give thanks to Arliss.
Yeah, thank you to Arliss for putting that together. And as you have information or stories or questions about these time periods, we want you please to feel free to just interject with whatever you'd like to add to what we're talking about. And oh shoot, Arliss, where's Arliss? I'm always yelling at Arliss. Can somebody look on the file cabinet right beside you, or Frida? I think is that Frida right there. On the file cabinet, are there some index cards sitting up there? And some pens, maybe? Oh, it's over there? Oh, okay. And we're just gonna pass those out in case you guys want to jot down some things that you would like to share with us so you don't forget. Or maybe even things that you would like to pass on to Mervyn to add to the history, okay? So just to give you a point of reference as far as what was happening on the Mennonite scene in the Kansas City area, we're going to begin by mentioning Belton, Missouri. In 1874, Belton had a small, very small gathering of Mennonites with 3 members. But we don't have much information on them at all. And they had preachers that were brought in to preach. And the last date for Belton was listed as 1890. And then we have the Sycamore Grove Mennonite Church. I think some left, but we still have Alice who's a part of that. They started, and that's out of Garden City, which is about an hour away, maybe. Is that from Kansas City? Okay. Anyway, their church building was dedicated in 1883. And then in Olathe, Kansas, in 1884, there was a church started there, and Judy's going to be talking about that in a little bit.
Okay. A history of Argentine Mennonite Church would be incomplete without acknowledging the foundation of Mennonite work in the Kansas City area. How did this work start anyway? And what I'm reading, Mervyn put together, I just changed a few words just because of whether I'm talking he, she, whatever. So anyway, South Central Frontiers, when that book,
Written by Paul Irvin.
okay, it recounts the beginning. And he also referred to a thesis by Norman T. entitled Harvest and Other Resources for Its History. And I know they went to the library, and we went to the Wyandotte County Museum, Historical Museum, and I'm not sure where all.
And Mervyn has Norman Teague's writing out on.
Yeah, on the table. And he went through multiple gospel heralds that his dad, and he went through his dad's, if you can believe it, his dad had saved all the secretarial notes. And I think he read every word of every one of them. He's been working on this night and day for the last month at least. So anyway, thank you, Mervyn. Thank you to all who shared your memories and of your experiences at Argentine Mennonite. One of the earliest Mennonite churches on record was that of a church plant in 1884. It is listed among the extinct churches in South Central and South Central Frontiers in the book. In 1884, Samuel Ernst and his 3 married children moved to Olathe and began meeting as a congregation. Other Mennonites settled in the area, and in 1887, they organized into a church but had no minister. Speakers came from Cass County and from other locations to minister. They bought a Presbyterian church building in 1998 and that had 17 members. In 1893, J.H. Hershey of Cass County was ordained for ministry to the congregation. But he moved to Pennsylvania in 1902, after which there were no services. There were 11 members when he left.
So that kind of gives you an idea of what was happening in communities nearby Kansas City. Now we're going to move more specifically to the Kansas City, Kansas area. And as we've been researching, it's neat to see how God has worked here over the years. And it's neat to see how the outreach that we've read about in the past has been similar to what we have been doing here. Well, I've been here about 23, 24 years. So in the time that I've been here, it's neat to see, you know, the similarities between the outreach since from way back then until now. And as I was researching, I learned some interesting facts about the city of Argentine in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Argentine was founded in 1880. And it was the headquarters of Kansas City Consolidated Smelting and Refining Company. It had the reputation of being the largest in the world in terms of capacity and value of ore refined. And at the end of 1882, Argentine was growing and prosperous. The smelter did a business of $10 million annually. Argentine was a wild, wide open town. There were blocks and blocks of saloons and few churches. In 1890, the population of Argentine was 6,500. And it was classified as a first-class city. But the expense of hauling ore to Kansas by rail increased, and that was a possible cause of the smelting company closing in 1901. After the smelter's closing, Argentine went into a depression. And in 1910, Argentine was annexed into Kansas City. In 1907, however, the Kansas City Structural Steel Company came to Argentine, and for many years, in terms of steel fabricated, it was considered the largest steel plant west of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And let's see, go on to the next one. Do y'all know what that building is? Anybody?
Kemper Arena.
Kemper Arena. And did you know that we have somebody in our congregation who did welding for Kemper Arena? Our own Frederick Seltzer. Okay. Now, Frederick, did you actually get up and weld, or you were welding in the building?
Well, in the plant.
In the plant. Okay, in the plant. Okay, and also Clyde worked there. Your son Clyde, right?
I also worked there for a while.
Oh, you did too. All right. All right. Okay, but now we're going to get back to Mennonite history. We're going to start with 1904. And here I need to say, guys, I didn't get done what I intended to get done. So there are not going to be pictures for much more. I apologize, my intentions were there, but it didn't happen. So anyway, so you're going to have to use your imagination, okay? All right. In 1904, 3 men had written letters to each other expressing the conviction that there should be a Mennonite mission in Kansas City. And so there was a committee of representatives from the Kansas-Nebraska Conference, the Missouri-Iowa Conference, and a representative from Sycamore Grove, because Sycamore Grove was the closest Mennonite church. And they met and they advised that the 2 conferences establish a mission.
As a result of this burden, the Mennonite Gospel Mission was planted. J.F. Brunk was called to organize and initiate the work, then located on 7th and Pacific in Kansas, Kansas. The first year, they experienced 57 professed conversions. It was in 1906 that the Board of Directors voted to deed the work to MBMC, Mennonite Board of Charities, Missions and Charities, with the purpose in mind of broadening the support for the work. The purpose of the mission was expressed in 5 statements. 1, to preach and teach the gospel. 2, to put homeless children into Christian homes. To provide clothing and food for the worthy poor, was 3. And number 4, to provide free medical aid for the poor. And 5, to welcome all classes, especially the poor and needy. The motto adopted by the workers was that of John Wesley. Do all you can, all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, and all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Quite a motto. The characteristic of the mission was to plant branches and stations. One of the first stations was in Argentine. It was somewhere around 1906 that Mildred Copenhaver began a prayer meeting in her living room. The group grew too large for her home here in Argentine. 47 people met there. It was apparent that a larger meeting place was needed. J.B. Brunk bought a storefront on 3105 Strong, just a few blocks from here. Workers resided upstairs and held services on the main floor. Attendance in Sunday school grew to 22 and later to 47. This station was called Free Gospel Mission.
Well, I guess we all have to turn sideways, but this is a building that we think was the mission building. The stone on this side of it, I thought looked similar when I went down and looked at it, but I didn't go in and talk to the people or anything. But it's 3105 strong if you're interested in going and looking it up when we're done today. Okay, in 1911, the board wanted to sell this building in Argentine, but there wasn't a buyer. So a couple, Mr. and Mrs. E.C. Bowman, joined the forces and lived in the Strong Avenue building. Bowman revived Sunday school in Argentine, which was an important step toward permanent work in Argentine.
In 1912, J.D. Menninger came to Kansas City and worked tirelessly until his death in 1941. In 1914, Kansas City experienced a major flood. Many homes were destroyed, and especially those of the poor people. The mission in Argentine organized a clothing and food drive for these unfortunate people. Most of the donations came from Mennonite churches in the South Central Conference. From 12 to 14 people were housed in the mission home while their homes were being rebuilt. This afforded a tremendous opportunity to present the gospel. They really had no houses to go home to. Many of those who benefited from this ministry continued to come to Sunday school and church. It is a testimony of the dedication of the leaders that the mission grew exponentially. They dedicated their efforts to the Lord's work. For example, in 1905, there's record that they visited 530 homes, saw 57 confessions of faith, and added 16 new members to the church. In 1913, Brother Lapp conducted a tent meeting, an evangelistic effort that used a tent set up at 42nd Metropolitan in Argentine. By the late 30s, there were 5 stations: Argentine, Midway, Morris, Condero, and the Gospel Center in KC Mo.
Just interject something here. Yeah, this is actually not a picture of the 1908 flood, but or vice versa. This is not a picture of the 1914 flood. But I don't know, you guys that have lived in Kansas City, there was a big one in 1908, 1914.
1903.
And then 51 also.
No,
And
51.
then in what, 93, 77?
One of the purpose statements acknowledged the need to place orphan children into Christian homes. Brother Menninger had already placed some children into Mennonite homes through the Gospel Herald publication. In 1906, the Board of Trustees for the mission voted to open a day nursery in connection with the mission. This was long before daycare facilities were even thought of in secular society. Then in 1914, MBMC established a receiving home for homeless or neglected children. A building was rented for this purpose. In 1919, this building at 1620 South 37th was purchased and dedicated. Thus began the children's home ministry of the Mennonite Church. In 1934 and in 1951 to 1952, the building was remodeled to include a new front and some private rooms to house workers and children needing privacy. Most of the children slept dormitory fashion. Volunteers from all over the United States and Canada came to minister here, usually committing a year of service. It was a ministry in which like-minded workers could serve the Lord. Some met spouses there. Some of these couples remained in Kansas City, finding jobs and ministering in the various stations. The children's ministry, home ministry, was one of the main outreaches of the Argentine Mennonite Church.
Could we just see a show of hands of how many people here work with the children's home?
I think I started it.
And Cheryl? And Cheryl, I was hearing a story the other night about a little girl that was too young to go to the children's home and that
my grandparents were George J. and Henrietta Ursula Gunrich. And there was a family who had lost their father to death. And the mother was kind of desperate. She put the children in the children's home. And she was too young. She was a baby. She was too young to be handled by them. So my grandparents took her home and raised her. Her name is Rosemary Sanford. And she actually came to Dad's funeral the other day, which was totally amazing.
Was she the lady in the wheelchair?
She was the lady in the wheelchair, yes. So she is, she's still with us today and we consider her family.
Does she live in Kansas City?
She does not. She lives more towards the Lake of the Ozarks.
And again, if you guys have things that you want to interject when we're talking, feel free to do that. The tappy pull, is that what you said?
Apparently they did tappy pools up at the children's home. Was that the workers or the children? And my uppers too, Mervyn said, so. Okay.
Chief Hoppers, do you want to just share a little bit about how your mom and dad met through you had step siblings, right, that were in the children's home, and that's how your mom and dad met?
Our dad had 12 children, like his first wife. She passed away in 1947. I think it was. She had a baby. And he was born with his dad. And he was daddy and the children. They lived with the old boy. They were sitting around the age of young girls. And he was at mom. And Colorado. TV. She went to work up there. She met dad. And they had 9 of us.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, in 1908, the Union Pacific Railway tracks ran through the Argentine bottoms.
I think it's kind of, we're getting to the end of the picture, so.
We had a picture of the train, but maybe we don't. I haven't posted, haven't put those. One Mennonite worker, Brother Charles, had the burden of ministering to those who worked the rails. He established a chapel service for them the first Tuesday of the month in one of the railroad shops at noon, with 20 to 40 in attendance. This lended credence to Brother Menninger's statement, "I believe that Christ, not the church building, should be the center of our evangelistic efforts. Therefore, go out into the highways and byways and win them, go where the fish are."
And as I heard what Menninger had said, I thought about Sandeep has been working with us on discipleship making ministry, right? And I thought it kind of sounds like Brother Menninger was that was his thing.
During World War I, there were a number of Mennonites drafted into the military, yet who refused to take active part in the military combat. The government had yet to provide for alternative service. These men were housed in both the Lansing and Fort Leavenworth military barracks. They were assigned numerous and desirable tasks and were often ridiculed for their convictions. Even as late as in the 1960s, Brother Horst would burst into tears as he described their condition. Frequently, they would be called cowards by other soldiers. They would be assigned permanent KP duty. One was even hung upside down in the latrine and told to muck it out and be given no food until the job was done. Can't imagine. Others were beaten to try to convince them to take up arms and go out to combat. A few relented, but most held true to their convictions. Brother Menninger organized a group from the Kansas City Gospel Mission to travel weekly to Leavenworth and Lansing to minister to these Anabaptists who were drafted into the military. The average number in attendance to the chapel service he directed was around 20 men. It was a ministry of compassion that they maintained until the war ended and those soldiers sent home. In those early years, workers were quite busy on Sundays. It was not uncommon for a worker to have 4 preaching assignments, teach 2 Sunday school classes, and teach a Bible class, all in one day. The war to end all wars ended in 1919 with dramatic political changes in Europe. But the war between good and evil, between God and Satan, and between God's church in Kansas City and the evil in society surrounding her was just beginning. 1920s, this is a decade known as the Roaring 20s. The war to end all wars was over. The communists took over Russia as the result of the Bolshevik Revolution. Prohibition was on the horizon in the U.S. Organized crime governed the streets of many cities, major cities. Liberal theology through New Enlightenment theology was infiltrating the seminaries. But it was also a time that it was a time when a new vision came to the church. Mission groups like China Inland Missions were sending missionaries into China and India, as well as into Asia and Africa. In Kansas City, the Mennonite Gospel Mission was planted, initially by the conferences of Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas, Nebraska, then assigned to the Mennonite Board of Missions and Charities. Regular reports were submitted to the Gospel Hero every work year. In 1920, the mission building on Strong Avenue was sold, and worship moved to 1521 South 18th Street, worshiping in a vacant church there. The board acknowledged that the Argentine congregation needed a place of worship more centrally located and closer to the children's home. And again, in 1921, moved location to 3713 Powell. The next year, the board decided to purchase property at 3701 Metropolitan, on which to build a permanent church building. Volunteers came from Ontario, Missouri, Kansas, and Iowa to erect the building. L.A. Weaver, a builder in the church, was foreman to this building project. This location was 3 blocks away from the children's home, within easy walking distance. The workers and children needed to walk to both school and church. As most of you know, it's right up the hill.
And so right about that time, the weekday Bible school was envisioned. And the weekday Bible school, I know that Estella Kefauver was a part of that later on. And I don't know, does anybody want to share a little bit? Mervyn, do you want to tell a little bit about the weekday Bible school or?
I think we have some statistics in the way you're reading, but it was started and interestingly, a juvenile judge noted that when weekday Bible school started in Argentina, the juvenile crime rate in Argentina decreased significantly.
Oh, sorry, Jen.
In the 60s, it would have been before in the mid 60s, like 65 to 67, somewhere in there. We came every Wednesday to church here from New Stanley before it was new, when it was just Stanley. But we would go to the different churches, and I remember coming here for Bible school. If we would come during school time on Wednesdays. So.
And I don't know when over the years this was done, but there is a wonderful picture file, very organized over in our little Sunday school area. And I think in my head, Estella was probably part of it. I really don't know. But there's a section of pictures for weekday Bible school, and then just, all other Bible stories categorized so neatly. And you don't know how many times I go to that closet and pull out these things that they organized. I mean, they put them on cardboard and then they're categorized on the back, you know, in order. And so whoever did that in years past, I want them to know that their pictures are still being used today.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I was responsible for the children's school or coming out of church with the family for the last 2 seasons that we had. And I don't remember anymore. I was wondering, I can't remember how come we didn't have it, but it seemed to me like the board said we could no longer do it. And we didn't have it here for a little while, and then we started it back again and had it for those 2 years that I know of, and after that, I don't think it was any.
Well, you know, we were having a discussion about that because the history says that it ended in like 72, 73 school year. And Arliss, who was substituting in 1985, said, well, they were doing it when he was teaching. And so we were trying to figure out, was Arliss getting
Yeah.
faked out by the kids? The kids told him they're going to Bible school, so he dismissed them.
I do remember in the 80s
Okay.
it being done, because I remember you would take off work and you would come down here during the work week. And they would come across the street. Now, I never lived there, 'cause I was at school myself, but they would come across the street and they had to have permission forms signed by their parents to come over.
And I'm not sure whether it's
So it
Catherine,
was in the 80s. You're right.
Catherine and maybe Stella. And I had a couple kids, a couple that we was in Bible study with from Calvary Bible College, and they come out and help us too, all that down. I'm not sure who the lady was, but I think it was Stella and Catherine. There might have been more, I don't know.
Thanks for sharing.
And I think we had something in the 80s. What it had to do with was, we had in the morning at the Methodist church, we had the breakfast club. And then they started letting us do an extension. And I think that's probably in the 80s when they would have come over here. Like, it's because the school was being let out at 1:15. And so some of the area churches took kids home.
And so began the work of the Argentine Mennonite Church. The dedication of the church building at 3701 Metropolitan was held on February 21st, 1925. Membership had grown to about 70 the year before. This building forms the basic structure of the current building located at the same address. The district's name is Argentine, the historic home of the silver smelting plant. Railroad tracks passed right by the plant, with cars entering into it. In fact, there is still an annual parade that passes down Strong Avenue called the Silver City Parade. A mural on the wall of 34th and Metropolitan artistically depicts the history of Argentina, dating back to Native American history. It is significant that local gangs have respected this mural by not defacing it with graffiti. And that's been something we've watched and watched. And it's never happened. We're so thankful. The first pastor of AMC was J.D. Menninger, with R.P. Force as his assistant. AMC became the base of operation for the mission when the work at 7th Street discontinued. Interestingly, in 1923, Brother Menninger estimated that it would take about $300 a year to support each worker in the mission. That's a long ways. $300 a year. In 1926, AMC opened weekday Bible school. Students from the public school across the street, Stanley School, were dismissed to go to the new AMC built church building for a time of Bible teaching. The enrollment was initially 34 students. This grew to 87 in 1927, 108 in 1928, and to an enrollment of 139 in 1929. It was noticed that many of the students did not attend Sunday school anywhere on Sunday mornings, thus lacking moral and religious instruction. Weekday Bible School was an effort to teach the Bible to children who could voluntarily come to the church and to teach them songs of praise in the church. A juvenile court judge in Wyandotte County noted that the juvenile crime rate in Argentina declined noticeably as a result of this program. This effort continued for 46 years until in 1972, the separation of church and state controversy influenced its discontinuance. Even in the 1990s, Mervyn said he continued to meet people who had been influenced by AMC's weekday Bible school. It's always nice when you're out and about and you say, they say, oh, you know, where do you go to church or whatever, and you say it and they got a connection. It's neat. In the 1930s, these are the years of Great Depression in the US. Times were very difficult for Americans, as we all well know. R.P. Forrest tearfully recounts the day that one of his workers came to work with only potato peels in his lunchbox. Other co-workers didn't even have lunchboxes. Long lines formed just to get something to eat at soup kitchens, usually funded and staffed by local churches. Sin abounded, but the grace of God abounded more. Employment was scarce and labor cheap. Federal and state government programs were inadequate to address the depression. But in reading the accounts of the Kansas City Mennonite Mission, these dire conditions take a back seat to the spiritual and emotional needs of those to whom they ministered. Teague's account listed numerous revival meetings through those years, with no mention of the depression anywhere in the account. Again, if you go to the history reported on the AMC Facebook page, there is a listing of these at least 14 meetings. Is it any wonder that the work of Christ grew to the extent it did with such an effort? But there's more. Morris Gospel Hall opened in 1931. It was initially a Sunday school and summer Bible school effort that grew into a congregation. It was a place that both saved and unsaved could come to worship, regardless of denominational preference.
The Morris Gospel Hall had originally been met in a school, but in 1937, a restaurant became the Morris Gospel Hall. And there was a grocery store with a pool hall in the back, next door to the church. And this is a quote from, I have a book from the library that was about Morris, and this quote said, "Unfortunately, the plentiful supply of penny candy at the store tempted children to divide their Sunday school offering. A penny for God and a penny for candy seemed to be a suitable division in the Sunday school people's minds." Oh, maybe I'll share this right now too while I'm at it. The other night when I was at the visitation for Cheryl's dad and Lloyd's brother, I think, Lloyd, it was your daughter that was sharing with me that she remembers coming to Sunday school, or not Sunday school, I don't know, church anyway, maybe Sunday school, and putting her offering in a church. And it dawned on me, I think there's one of these in our closet, and I'm not sure if this is the same one, but I thought that was neat. What?
I remember, but
You do?
Yeah.
Well, so Lloyd, would your daughter have come here in the 1970s? I think she thought it was in the 70s. Unless it was some. Okay, yeah. But I just thought that was neat. So a penny for God, a penny for candy. Penny for God.
I thought it lit up.
No, I see, I don't know, I didn't try it. That's a good.
I would think
I can go over there and try to plug it in, we'll find out. But anyway.
Penny for God, penny for the church. Is 50%, that's better than God.
Are you suggesting a change? Okay. Morris was organized into a congregation in 1946 with 16 charter members. Brother Ed Yoder was the minister, with Levi Hirschberger ordained deacon as his assistant. The work was closed by the flood of 1951. The building had suffered severe damage. And if you look in the kitchen, you can see it does light up. And it even opens the door. You don't think where people have eyes. Open up the door.
They found the
And
people.
it lights up and there are people in the church.
Yes. The home department of AMC was organized in 1934. It was very effective in reaching shut-ins and homebound residents. Its efforts expanded into nursing home visits. Initially with the Wyandotte County Old Folks Home. Some of the shut-ins were some of the shut-ins were even driven to church services by volunteer members of the congregation. By 1950, under Katie Saltzman's direction, there were 160 enrolled. The expansion of this home visitation was limited only by the number of workers available. That regularly includes the NYF and VS volunteers, as well as 1W workers from KU Med Center and KC General Hospital. The first wedding at AMC was that of Claude Wise and Louise Jones, a convert at Midway on February 11th, 1931. And we have with us Carol Wise Sumter, who was Claude and Louise's youngest child. And we also have, and I guess the only reason I said that got away, Carol's been my friend for years and years. And so, I mean, she just kind of came out first, but Lauren, I believe, and Joy are both here too. And that is two more of Claude and Louise's children. So it's really great. It's just neat to have the connection between people being here and people that we're talking about that made up the history of the church. And in the hallway is a quilt that's hanging that Carol loaned us that was made sometime during Claude and Louise's time of attending here. And it looks like maybe different church members or families participated in making that quilt. And so anyway, if you have a chance to look at it, it's really a neat piece of artwork. So thank you, Carol, for sharing that with us. Midway was one of 5 stations established under Kansas City Mission and shared workers with Argentine. It began as a Sunday school in a former dance hall in 1925. Louise Jones Wise came to know the Lord there, and after their marriage, she and Claude became long-term active members of Argentine. They were listed as charter members of AMC. Her original handwritten testimony is on the display table in the hallway. And I can't remember if it's further on or now, but since I'm thinking of it now, I'm going to mention it. But charter, as far as charter members go, the very last surviving charter member of Argentine Mennonite passed away this last week. It was Cheryl's father and Lloyd's brother. And so we're glad you all were able to make it today. But you know, Vernon Gungrich, I'm sorry, I'm not saying it right.
We don't care how you say it at this point. We say Gunrich, but Ginrich.
So anyway, thank you for coming today. The work at Quindaro was started as a summer Bible school. It offered such good witnessing opportunity that Brother Menninger organized the outreach into a church in 1939. There were about 35 people in attendance on Sunday mornings. He continued this work until his death in 1941. The 30s ended with war clouds hovering over Europe. Italy had allied with Germany, and Japan was rattling sabers in the Pacific. 1940s, world history of the early 40s was dominated by World War II. Hitler had devoured much of Europe. Under Nazi direction, the Holocaust murder of 7 million Jews was taking place, though the world didn't realize its extent until the war ended. Europe laid in ruins from the destruction of the war that ended with Axis defeat in 1945. The work of the Mennonite Gospel Mission grew, with many swept into the kingdom of God. In 1941, Brother J.D. Menninger died. He was a tireless and effective minister of the word in the Kansas City Mission. Deacon William Smith was ordained as mission superintendent, but also died within the year. Deacon Ed Yoder was subsequently appointed as superintendent of the mission. But the work of the Lord at AMC continued to prosper through this work of the Spirit and as a result of its ministries. In 1943, there was a baptism service for 13 children from Children's Home. In Norman Teague's thesis, Harvest, he recounts a volume of people saved and encouraged by the home visitation ministry in the 40s and 50s. Shut-ins, in whom practically no one took interest, were brought to church services. Brother Forrest literally carried a teenage boy into the church who was paralyzed. Most shut-ins were very poor, living in rundown housing in Armourdale and Argentine. For some, the visit from a visitation team from AMC was the only church they had. Ministry at the Wyandotte County Oak Folks Home was held once a month. A group, usually from the MYF here at Argentine, would make their rounds on the second floor, where there were a number of people who could not leave their beds to attend the chapel service in progress on the first floor.
And just a short little snippet to let you know what was going on across the state line over in Kansas City, Missouri. The Mennonite Gospel Center was established on Washington Street.
In February of 1946, the Argentine church was chartered 21 years after its building was dedicated. R.P. Forrest was asked to be the pastor, with Roy Zook ordained as deacon. Ed Yoder continued to be superintendent, with primary responsibility at Morris and the Gospel Center. In 1947, Levi C. Hirschberger was ordained as deacon and also served as liaison between the Kansas City Mission and South Central Conference. He also helped in the ministry at both Morris and Chapel. And I really often try and steer those stories, those snippets of those days from Mervyn, who I think probably every time your dad had went to church, you boys went with them. And Calvin is here today too. Yeah, Calvin and his aunt, so Mervyn's older brother. So anyway, yeah. A lot of connections here.
Okay, and then just a little bit more again on Kansas City, Missouri. In 1948, the first long-term voluntary service unit began. And the BSers worked at Kansas City General Hospital, and they lived at the Mennonite Gospel Center, and then a BS unit was set up, a BS unit house on Kings Road.
Norman Teague, who had grown up in the children's home, was licensed to minister in 1948. His father was an alcoholic, resulting in his mother bringing him and his siblings to the children's home. He met the Lord through this ministry and attended Heston College in preparation for ministry. While at Heston, he wrote his thesis called Harvest, a historical review of the ministry of the Kansas City Mission. That document is the source of much of the information included in this historical review. In his testimony, recorded in his thesis, he recounts how Brother Menninger and his children's home worker, Fanny Troyer, led him to the Lord. Fanny later married Levi Hirschberger, and he was my mother-in-law. In 1949, the mission in Condero closed, and the funds from the sale of that property were used to build an addition to the Argentine church. There were two families who were builders in the Argentine congregation, the Kings and the Weavers. Dan King oversaw the new construction, which was built mainly using volunteer labor from the members of the congregation. Levi Weaver, another builder in the congregation, oversaw the plumbing and electrical work. Unfortunately, Levi had all the plans in his head and never did put those plans on paper.
What year was that?
1949.
That's 1950, 1949, 50. It was at what? When No, was it active?
It was a 51.
I remember when you built
Yeah. 1 or 2 days, but unfortunately, Levi had all the plans and never did put those plans on paper. He took them with him to the grave. So later, electrical and plumbing repairs had to be worked out cold turkey. I think maybe Herman worked some of those cold turkey plans out.
My dad, and I did a lot too.
Oh, okay, Paul Betty Cooper,
Yeah.
We
and
watered
then,
the upper well, over.
okay. Okay, the ministries of AMC continued throughout the 40s. The children's home continued to minister to needy children. The home department continued to visit shut-ins and old folks' homes, later to be renamed retirement centers. Full church services were held at AMC. Summer Bible school was held each summer. Weekday Bible school continued to minister to school-age children, and that ministry influenced other churches in Argentina to follow suit. There were annual evangelistic meetings, sometimes even 2 per year. The congregation at AMC continued to grow through her ministry. The charter membership list of 118 declined by the transfer of membership to other locations and from the withdrawal of some for one reason or another, but principally by death. The last charter member known to us, to this writer, to Mervyn, passed away Easter Sunday, April 17, 2022. Vernon Gingrich. And there is still much to be done in Argentina. There is an article written by Lois Kefauver Bear on the display table as the way she remembers AMC, with many fond as well as honest memories. A very pertinent note that she wrote reads as follows. I knew that being committed to Jesus was a real priority for me. And for that, I thank my parents and friends at Argentina Mennonite Church. I also knew that my commitment had to be expressed differently. And for that, I thank my many other Christian friends. I'm grateful to my mother for showing me how to remain faithful through difficulties. And to my father for showing me that extending grace, even in disagreement, is also a faithful witness. And that little bit of that little paragraph, talking kind of, it'll kind of be explained in the next 10 years. The decade of the 40s ended with the tensions of the Cold War. The US and USSR competed to build a nuclear arsenal that each hoped would deter the other from using theirs. Tensions were building in Korea and finally broke out into the Korean War. Meanwhile, the Mennonite Church was carrying the message of peace to a war-torn world through programs such as PAX, which worked at rebuilding Europe.
Calvin was part of that PAX building. Calvin worked in PAX.
Kelvin, you have something to say, or you just?
No.
Okay,
I work in Europe.
okay. Okay, so that's, okay. The world events of the 1950s were dominated by the Korean War and the Cold War. There was genuine fear that the Soviet Union would unleash their arsenal of ICBM missiles carrying nuclear warheads that would effectively end life as we know it. Public schools held drills in which the students would actually get under their desks for protection. I remember that. Later, civil defense established a network of fallout shelters that would withstand the rigors of a nuclear bomb. The funds from the sale of the Pandero Church were used to complete the additional construction of AMC in around 1950. As mentioned in an earlier entry, the Morris Gospel Mission was started in 1931. 20 years later, in 1951, the flood closed it down.
And just another little snippet about the Missouri side. Several of the members from Morris, transferred over to be a part of the Kansas City Gospel Center on Washington Street in Kansas City, Missouri.
And you can read an account by Mervyn on AMC's Facebook page. His account of how he remembers the flood. A Baptist church purchased the property, cleaned it up, and organized Morris Baptist Church. In retrospect, we Mennonites might have been able to do that ourselves, even with the ruination of the Morris community. The Argentine, and I might say that that little building is still there. It has been renovated several times, but it's still there. A nice little church, the same, and it's the original building is still, part of it stands there still. And there's been an active congregation there. The Mennonite Children's Home was the major outreach of the church. The original building of the church, erected in 1924, with the target administering to workers, children, and families of the children's home. Every Sunday morning, children from the children's home filed down the 37th Street sidewalk under the close supervision of their workers. The basement of the church was divided into Sunday school classrooms, some of them bounded only by curtains. The kitchen was even used as a classroom. After Sunday school, the children's home children filed into the sanctuary, occupying the first 3 pews on both sides. The adults with families crowded into the remainder of the sanctuary, including an overflow into the balcony. Air circulated by way of an extractor fan with the windows open. It was hot and sweaty in the summer, cold and drafty in the winter, but we worshiped the Lord there no matter what the weather was outside. Originally, the congregational seating was divided between men and women. The men were on the left and the women and children on the right. There was a short bench on either side of the pulpit reserved for the deacons. That comprised the amen section. Men initially wore plain coat suits and women cape dresses. All Mennonite women at that time wore prayer coverings to church. That sort of dress code broke down as the congregation grew. Families began to sit together and youth formed clusters around the sanctuary. The balcony was a favorite place since the extractor fan pulled the air through there. Our regular services, or the regular services here at Argentine Mennonite, followed a pattern: 9:45 Sunday school, 11 a.m. morning worship, 7 p.m. youth service, followed by a sermon, and 7 p.m. prayer meetings on Wednesday. One of the memories expressed by respondents was that of the music at AMC. It was always 4-part harmony with no musical instruments. And Mervyn says when he asked his dad about that, his dad simply said, "We just don't use musical instruments." Mervyn is researched and cannot find anything in scripture that prohibited the use of instruments. In fact, there are many references to their use in worship service. Lester Horst was the chorister in the 50s. I suppose is that a cousin? Yeah.
I've been one of Ruth Horst's sons.
Yeah, that's what I got. He called participants to practice sessions in which he emphasized and taught 4-part harmony. And he really had a beautiful voice. I do remember that early in moments in my marriage. I remember him leading. He always tuned us in with his pitch pipe. Each year, the church council assigned a nominating committee.
Can I interject something?
Yes.
Lester had a goal of leading us through all 600 some hymns in the church hymnal. We go 3 or 4 per Sunday night. And he wanted us to all learn those songs. But we never did get that project finished.
I'm trying to think how many. I guess there's 361 days, but 52 weeks, so I guess you'd have to divide 52 into 600 to know how many youth services you had to be taught. So AMC used highway billboards to share the gospel in an effort to reach those who drove the highways. In one location, a billboard would have a Bible verse printed with ANC address included. Another had a series of words with a single line or a series of single words in consecutive order to be read as you drive along. This was an economical way to share Christ with the world. The congregation had developed a rather conservative discipline from the time it was chartered. Some in leadership emphasized the evils of life insurance, the proper dress for men and women, non-resistance, and other fairly strict teachings. Those disciplines were applied to the degree of them being gospel. In the late 1950s, a disagreement arose within the Argentine congregation regarding divorce and remarriage. There was strong disagreement with unnecessary and unneeded words being exchanged. Those supporting the remarriage option left ANC to establish Grace Mennonite in Shawnee under the leadership of Brother Lowell Nisley. Sharp contention continued even into disagreement about who would claim the songbooks and the clothes hangers. The church never did fully recover from that dissension. Mervyn wrote that he was at a loss to explain how a church that teaches peace and non-resistance as its distinguishing doctrine could become so combative in the interaction between members. ANC had some radically conservative Mennonite leaders who felt that their options were nearly always right. They felt that their interpretation of God's word was the only way to read it. Irving continues on, why couldn't we simply disagree agreeably and live the peace that we preached? The dissension damaged the outreach ministry into the community. A number of people left for other congregations. Several of the younger in the congregation expressed the pain that they experienced from the harshness of some of the leaders. One was given a letter of excommunication because he did not attend communion service. Another was disciplined when he entered the Air Force, even in a 1AO non-combative classification. That damage done by the harshness of these leaders was significant to the ministry and growth of ANC. It really damaged the image of Mennonites in the Argentine community. Unfortunately, this is the image that more than one respondent recounted when remembering ANC. Late in the 50s, the youth asked the pastor for a Bible study that would explain the numerous teachings and restrictions that the Mennonites held, especially those of the more conservative teachings. They studied a booklet, This We Believe, which was informative and held true to biblical doctrine. However, it failed to answer the questions about Mennonite teachings. In retrospect, this could have been a pivotal point in time for discipling the youth group here and preserving them to be the future leaders of ANC. Instead, several left for other churches who did explain their particular teachings biblically. Others left for alternative service assignments or moved elsewhere. In 1957, the pastor of ANC, Reverend Lowell Nisley, took some members from the Argentine congregation to start Grace Mennonite Church in Shawnee, according to South Central Frontiers on page 350. In January 1958, they had 39 members, 31 of whom came from ANC. By the 1960s, they had grown to a membership of 48. The 50s decade ended with ANC being a wounded congregation, but one that was determined to continue its mission. And Mervyn has some closing remarks.
That you were supposed to memorize the hymns and the hymn book.
Supposed to learn.
My mother and sister got all her daughters memorize all the hymns, because someday you'll be holding a child and you can't hold that hymn book.
Oh,
Learning those hymns, and I've been so grateful all my life. Because now sometimes my hand's shaking, I can't hold that.
That was the end of what we'll be covering today. but the story goes on, starting with the sixties and going on. And it seems to me that this is kind of a low note to close this service. But I think God is working here. I think God has, there's obviously plenty of work to be done here in Kansas City. Homeless people, we have children that need teaching and the word of God. There's plenty of work to be done here. The purpose of this historical review was to recapture the vision that God has given us of our purpose here in Argentina, and then to evaluate and plan for the transition that He would have us to enter into for the future of our congregation here and for future assets. The real purpose of the church is salvation of souls and to promote growth of each child of God into maturity, making disciples that will in turn make disciples. That's kind of a key note of the disciple-making ministries that Pastor Cindy is heading up here. Brother Menninger encouraged everyone he met to have, quote, Jesus in your heart. That came out in numerous different snippets that I saw. We are God's instruments of redemption to bring the lost to Christ and to affect the evil in the world around us with His love. AMC and Mennonite Mission has really been blessed to be in the Lord's service here in Kansas City. Much of the work here was Holy Spirit directed and empowered, yet we do need to acknowledge our mistakes and errors in our history as well. We need to learn from them, ask God's forgiveness for them, and then to determine to follow God's leading for our future. We do plan to continue, as we mentioned, this review at another session or sessions. We haven't determined when or how many yet, but at least another session. We ended in 1960, and this is 2022. Yeah, I told someone, they asked how many sessions, and they said, well, you know, in writing the history, there were 27 pages up to 1960, and there are more than 40 after that. So there's quite a bit of material.
And we have better memories of those last 40 than we do.
We'll take up our history from 1960 and follow it through to the present. We learn from our past, correct any errors, and emphasize God's plan for redemption, and be about the Lord's calling and work as He implements us to do. We may appear to have limited resources. Our congregation here has gotten pretty small. And we're not as young as we were 20 years ago. And these stairs get more and more difficult to walk with every day that comes. But there's a plan here that God has. So what we're doing is planning to transition into what God plans for us to do. Other groups are working, Youth Front is working here in Kansas City. By the way, Rainbow Mennonite had their first, Grace Mennonite had their first 3 sessions, their first 3 Sundays in Youth for Christ auditorium. And we're discussing ways with Youth Front, the same organization, to continue working here. How can this building be used? How can our assets be used to further the work of Christ? We don't have to have a name to God's work. God has His own name on that. God, we have limited resources, but God has unlimited resources. Is there anyone that has anything that you'd like to add to this? This is a work in progress. Plan to get this online. It is online, but it's in a reserved online post right now. And I don't know, can we open that up to general public once they're finished?
Well, it's in Google Drive right now, but we can make that available. Yes, we can share that. And we can work logistics out. But before that, it'd be good to complete any entries that we want. Did anybody else have any memories you wanted to share? Like Kurt, did you want
Cheryl, you had a story that I wanted you to share. It was about when you came with your grandma.
Oh, look at you. I was a child. I fit under quilting frames. And all I can remember, I was enthralled with all of the ladies and all of the needles going up and down. And Grandma Gamrich used to say, out of here, come on. So that's just a memory that I had. And I'm trying to figure out which room the quilting frames were actually in.
Was it probably this one?
I think they sort of exposed that cabinets down here. Was it here? I believe so. I remember them quilting in here when I was a kid still. Yeah, okay. So in here. I don't know, later then, they might have done it for this room, but I was saying they did it in here. It's so hard in that room, but in that closet, I think. Which is, yeah, I think that's, yes.
We still cook every week.
You too. Oh, my goodness.
My daughter was always very busy with her children, and making sure that we were behaving. And she always wanted me to do quilting. She never made it as often as she'd like. But she did make it quite often. And she enjoyed that so much because it was this fellowship with the ladies quilters that were here. So, and it was here. So I remember coming in this door, which we were not allowed to come in. This door down here, so.
I've got just a couple of did you knows, and then if you have other stories you would like to share, feel free to do that. I really, oh, I'm sorry.
The church was very rigid and straight-laced. And I rebelled at an early age. And I went my own way. But I guess what I wanted to say is, all that rigidity and all the hymns that we learned as children had an effect on me later in life when I was willing to say, Lord, thank you for saving me. And so I just want to tell you about the rigidity was good to a certain extent because it helped me to understand what's going on in the world more and to watch for dangers. But anyway, I think the rigidity was good to a certain extent. Again,
I've enjoyed digging through things, looking up history of Argentine Mennonite. And I was in the library the other week and found the library checkout. And did you know, this was like in the 1940s, AMC charged for overdue books. There was, in the 1940s, a 6-cent charge, up to a 35-cent overdue charge. So I've never experienced that in the church before. And they wrote down how long they were overdue. Somebody had a book that was overdue 26 weeks plus 3 days. And I was looking in 1942, and Lloyd Gingrich, or no, Gundrich, sorry. Did you know that you had checked out Boy Stories of Great Men? So if anybody wants to look at this, there you go. Well, you know, I think he did. I think it said it was returned, so I don't think he had anything overdue. What did it say?
was that one of the overdue books?
I don't think it was. I think it said that you returned it, I think. Does anybody else have stories that you'd like to share? Because you haven't had a lot of time to do that. So if there are things that you're remembering. Okay, well, I just had a few things that I wanted to check in with you. Are there any ideas or suggestions that you would have for our next celebration? How we could maybe improve or do things differently that would be more helpful to you guys? We've got Bible school coming up in June, so the next one probably won't be at least until July, so. Well, we are so glad. Well, yeah, you're why we were able to do it, right? I don't know if you noticed in the hallway, we have some, I guess I mentioned it upstairs, but some old song books and Bibles, if any of you want to take them. We're kind of cleaning out the cupboards, and I've kept, extra copies of them, but those are free to take. And, another question, if we have, and I'm not sure if we have all of your cell phone numbers, but is it okay if we text you a message about the next one, or would you prefer a written invitation in the mail? What works best for you guys? Any opinion? Are written invitations better still?
I think even I do sometimes.
Okay. Oh, and also, if you could leave your name tags before you leave, that way we can use them again for the next time, if you guys are able
There's
to make
another
it.
wall.
Okay, was there anything else that anybody wanted to share before Sandy closes in prayer? Yeah.
I don't know if some might be interested. On occasion, our daughter was the administrator for South Central Conference for the last, 3 years, maybe. I'm not sure how long it's been. 8 years, okay. Anyway, time flies. On occasion, she has gotten calls from persons who wanted to know where they can find data on the children that were at the children's home. It will be like a child of someone, and they say, well, my parent was at the children's home. Can I find out any information about that? All she could do was refer them to the one social service that kind of took that over.
Pace, yeah.
Is it Pace?
I think it's Pace.
Yeah, I think she had that name and number, but we've always wondered, are there records from those years and where would they be?
I understand those records were sent to the archives, Mennonite Historical Archives.
So they would be in Goshen, Indiana. Okay, that may be helpful just to know, because we were never quite sure where to refer them, but it's just once in a while, she'd get a call like that someone still wanted to connect with history at children's home.
They used to send children's home, keep the kids out for the summer. I don't know, for a week or 2 weeks, or what it was, but they would send them out to local congregations around.
I know, I went all the way to Protection, Kansas,
Yeah.
and I was, I don't know, the summer of 64 or summer of 65, I can't tell. We had 2 boys in our house. From children's home.
We had something down in Oklahoma.
I was where I was sent.
Elaine did have one question that might be of interest. Those of you who worked at the children's home, where did you come from? Where was home?
Pinto, Maryland, Pennsylvania.
We're at Pennsylvania, Belleville. Okay. Iowa. Okay.
My sister came from Michigan.
Okay. Mennonite Mission, Mennonite Board of Missions and Charities. Got a lot of people here.
A lot of them after married or going to get married too.
How many people met their spouses through the children's home? Keith and Esther, Louise and Herman, Cliff and Sarah Jane.
Our parents did.
Yeah. Stella.
Yeah. And Herman and Louise.
My uncle Leonard Miller.
Oh, that's right.
Better than that.
Better than that.
And it's over. And who else? Is it what they want? I know.
I know invitations
Okay,
were
doors
sent out
away.
to people that didn't come, that are way far away, I mean, in other states, and we didn't exactly expect them to come, but we wanted them to at least know what was going on. And maybe if this does get archived on YouTube or whatever, whatever they do,
Hey,
that would
did
be
anybody want
something
that Schultz and,
that maybe those people could see what.
You know, do you think the next one is gonna be like a lunch or something? I know they used to have children coming.
It was that.
I don't know if they could track those down and invite them to come to it because
who was that?
we may, we used to have a reunion a lot.
Oh, yes, I don't know who. Okay, that's Schultz.
I don't know who would have. the
But you
information
need
to invite
to
them.
children.
It's
awful hard work.
You gotta find
Yeah. We, oh, yeah.
Oh, and by the way, Kevin, can you help me with his last name, Hungerford or Hungerford? Does anybody know his last name? He was Catherine Tice's, I guess, foster son. And he was gonna come, but he texted this morning and said that he had something come up, but he wanted to say hi to you all. So if you remember Kevin, Catherine Tice's foster son.
Yeah.
If you have any additional history, especially in 1960 on, let me know and I'll include it in this coming up history. This is a work in progress. It's not completed by any means.
And Keith and Esther have shared a lot of pictures from the sixties from the children's home, so those will be coming up too. And if anybody else has pictures they would like to loan or to share for a while. Oh, yeah, Keith did laundry. Keith did laundry. Yeah. I think maybe what we'll do is go ahead and have Sandy close in prayer, and then, but you guys are welcome to stay as long as you want. We don't have bed space, but you know, you can stay.
You might want to pay
Well, we got
real
rupture.
close attention to that.
Yeah, we can move the table or something.
In the timeline, it has, I think it puts things in perspective. And this is just the timeline up to the 60s. We'll have another one after that, and it's probably going to be Joyce.
Arnis is quite the architect, computer on the computer. Well, reality too.
Well, I want to just take some time to thank all of you for coming and joining. This is not just a presentation of history, but you are all part of it. And so it's so full of life and it's energizing to us. And so I just want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank the team for putting this together. The Dinas and the Hirschbergers have really put their heart and soul into this. And I would say from a perspective of somebody who has been here for the last 8 years, to learn from the history of the church, I think is an extremely helpful process for our own spiritual growth and for whatever we want to do. You know, I think it's something that can help us in all walks of life. And so to see the positive and the negative, and to take stock of where we are, and then to seek God's will for what He has for us next. That is our goal, and I think all of that research has really helped us with that. And I also invite all of you to pray for us as we try to figure out what this next steps are going to be, because God will have to lead us, even as we do our part in figuring these things out. So thank you everybody for coming, for the work that has gone in terms of the presentation, the research, but also the food and the tables and the set of spreads and the timeline.
Oh, man.
You may not be able to see all the details here, but I'll try to figure out how to get this available and maybe even have this online in some form so that we can all make the most of it. Yes,
I
Howard?
read sometimes on a timeline in these kind of events, there's been an invitation to have people who are part of it to sign the date and the time when they were a part of it. Just put their names on and put a date on it.
Yes.
So you have that as a history.
Yeah.
Thank you, Howard, for mentioning that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. So as we are fellowshipping, after we wrap up here and winding up, you can come in here and identify where on the timeline you want to put your name in there, and that would be great. I think we can make some markers available for that. So
Yeah, see how many went out that was here, went out or knew about going out to county home.
I think we found out that it's been torn down, actually. What the
But I
church
mean-
or the county
How
home?
many of them today that had been known to go out to county home? Anybody know? Have you?
Oh, he's asking when. Nobody's asking. I mean, gotcha.
I'm not sure. Does anybody have?
I think, did you go, Cliff?
Yeah, I just wondered how many of them went.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's a bunch of us.
So, yeah, raise your hand if you used to go out to the county home as an MOF or
Was that the nursing home I went to see?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, just keep your hands up so that I can get a picture.
My goodness, you might need to get over here, Cindy, so you can see everybody back there.
I don't remember doing that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let me just close our time in prayer, and then after that, yeah, just feel free to come onto this timeline and sign your name on it. Let's pray. Our loving Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for your faithfulness, for your work in this place from the 1800s all the way to the 1950s and 60s. We thank you for the way in which you brought people here, for the way in which you spoke to them, and for the way in which you used this community here to further the work of your kingdom, for the souls that were saved as a result of your presence here, and for the souls that were comforted and soothed and blessed and built up as a result of your presence here. And we know that your work continues all over the world. We also know that your work is in every part of the world, in some way is tied to the larger things that are happening in the world. And so even as we heard about what was happening in the beginnings of the First and Second World War, here we are where things are happening on a global scale that are affecting our country even right now. And so we look to you for our strength, for our hope, for our reassurance, because we know that ultimately you are sovereign. You take care of things at every level, at every scale. And each one of us is part of your wonderful and precious plan. So we pray that you will now continue to watch over us, continue to take us back safely to our homes, to our home churches, and that ultimately that you would keep us connected as people who have a relationship with this church at one point of time in history. And we thank you for everything that you're doing, and we thank you for what you are going to do in this place and in each one of our lives in the days to come. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.